Boston studio buzzed with anticipation, the kind of late-night talk show, energy meant to be warm light and forgettable. The audience clapped as the lights rose, casting a bright glow over the polished stage. But when Jonathan Roumie stepped out, something felt off. A white man with shoulder-length, wavy brown hair, a short beard dressed in a black leather jacket, dark jeans and a small silver cross necklace glinting under his collar. He moved with a quiet presence. His smile was faint, not reaching his eyes, as if he carried a weight no one could see. The crowd cheered, but there was a hush beneath it, like the air itself held its breath. The host, David Walsh, a 45-year-old white man with neatly combed brown hair, fair skin, wearing a sharp navy suit and a red tie, stood to greet him with a grin. "Jonathan, you look like a poet, straight out of a coffee house or a 90s rock star," David quipped, sparking laughter from the audience. Jonathan nodded, his lips curving slightly, and took his seat. He adjusted his jacket, his gaze drifting to the small table between them. On it sat a glass of water, a notepad, and a wooden crucifix broken its base cracked the figure of Christ, tilted as if in quiet pain. David seemed oblivious to its weight, sipping from a mug with his name etched on it, keeping the show's rhythm alive. "So much happening out there," Jonathan, David said, leaning back. "You seen the news about the new Pope, Michael Brennan, right? Guy's got this calm, almost otherworldly vibe." The audience chuckled, but Jonathan didn't. His eyes flicked to the broken crucifix, then slowly met David's. The camera zoomed in, catching a shadow in his expression, something unspoken, heavy. "There's something about him," Jonathan said, his voice low but steady. David blinked, caught off guard by the gravity in his tone. He leaned forward, trying to keep things light. "What, like spiritually? Or does he remind you of someone?" Jonathan shook his head. "Not what he reminds me of. What he doesn't." The studio fell into an odd stillness. The audience quieted, David's smile faltered. Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment, as if searching for something within. When he opened them, the studio lights seemed to dim just a fraction. With a quiet reverence, he reached out and touched the broken crucifix, his fingers tracing the crack like it held a memory. He held it briefly, then let it rest still, broken still there. "I've stayed quiet too long," he said, looking directly at David. The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the room. The audience froze. David didn't move. No one knew what was coming, but they felt it. This wasn't a joke. The cameras held steady, the silence stretching for one beat, then two. David finally spoke, his voice softer, uncertain. Quiet about what? Jonathan's gaze dropped to the table, not to the crucifix, but to some unseen place. His hand moved slowly to his jacket pocket, pulling out a faded yellowed envelope, its edges worn as if touched too many times. He placed it gently between them. "This came a few years ago," he said. "I was told not to open it." David leaned in curiosity, piqued. "By who?" Jonathan didn't answer right away. He stared at the envelope, his eyes like someone looking at an old wound. "It came after a meeting in Rome," he said. "Handed to me in silence, no explanation, no context, just this." He slid the envelope closer to David, who eyed it warily. No name adorned the front, only a faint symbol, a cross inside a circle. "I thought it was a mistake," Jonathan continued, "or maybe a warning. But there was a note inside. One line." He looked at the audience, the room holding its breath. "Don't read until the dove has landed." David raised an eyebrow. "The dove?" Jonathan nodded. "It didn't make sense then. I kept it, carried it for years, nearly forgot it." His voice grew distant. Then Pope Francis passed, and Michael Brennan was elected. The studio lights gleamed off the broken crucifix, the air growing heavy. For the first time, the production crew seemed unsure. No one fed lines to David's earpiece. No one held up cue cards. Jonathan sat still, as if he'd said all he could. But then he spoke again, softer, almost to himself. "There's something else." David turned to him, no longer playing to the crowd, just two men at a table, one carrying an unseen burden. What David asked, his voice cautious. After Brennan's election, Jonathan said, "I started dreaming. The same dream every night." He didn't dramatize, didn't embellish, but the plainness of his words made them heavier. "I'm standing in St. Peter's Square, but it's empty. The sky's pale like dawn, but lifeless. I look up at the balcony." David leaned closer, tension in his posture, and Jonathan nodded slowly. "He's there, Brennan in white, smiling." He paused, his eyes darkening. but he cast no shadow. A faint stir ran through the audience, an instinctive reaction to something unnatural. Jonathan went on, his voice steady. The sun's behind him, but the light passes through. No outline, no darkness, just light. He looked at David, not accusing, just knowing. It doesn't feel like a dream. It feels like a memory that hasn't happened yet. David tried to steer back to familiar ground. Dreams can be weird, right? Symbolic, maybe your mind working through something? Jonathan shook his head slightly. I've dreamed of loss, of grief, but I've never woken up crying. Not until this. He glanced at the audience, his voice softer. I didn't want to talk about it, not even to friends, because the more I thought, the more I wondered if I was seeing something no one else could. The studio was silent, not a shuffle or a cough. Jonathan sat there, his hand resting near the envelope, as if it anchored him against a storm. In his mind, he saw himself years ago, kneeling in prayer, feeling unworthy of the role of Jesus, asking God for guidance. Now he felt that same guidance placing this envelope in his path, not by chance. He thought of the small cross in his hotel room, the worn Bible he carried on set. Faith wasn't loud for him. It was quiet, steady, a compass in the dark. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket, a faint vibration. He glanced down, pulling it out just enough to see the screen. A text from an unknown number. Don't say more. They're watching. His pulse quickened, but he kept his face calm, tucking the phone away before David or the audience noticed. He knew in that moment every word he spoke next would pull him deeper into a path with no way back. The Boston studio was a frozen tableau, the audience's silence a heavy shroud after Jonathan Roumie's words about his dream of Michael Brennan, the new pope with no shadow. Jonathan, a white man with shoulder-length, wavy brown hair, a short beard dressed in a black leather jacket, dark jeans and a small silver cross necklace, sat still, his hand near the faded envelope on the table. The broken crucifix beside it seemed to pulse under the studio lights, its cracked base a silent witness. David Walsh, the host, a 45-year-old white man with neatly combed brown hair, fair skin in a navy suit and red tie, stared at Jonathan, his usual charm faltering. The text Jonathan had just glimpsed, "Don't say more." Their watching burned in his mind, but he kept his face calm, tucking the phone deeper into his pocket. David cleared his throat, trying to reclaim the show's rhythm. "That's intense, Jonathan," he said, his voice lower than usual. "A dream like that, it's got to shake you up. But maybe it's just your subconscious, right?" Working through the news, Jonathan's eyes met David's, steady but piercing. "It's not just the dream," he said. "It's what came after." He tapped the yellowed envelope, its faint cross and circle symbol catching the light. 2 days after Brennan's election, another letter arrived. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a second envelope, thinner pale blue, its edges smudged, as if handled in haste. He placed it beside the first of the table, now a map of secrets. David leaned forward, his curiosity outweighing his unease. Another one. From the same person. Jonathan shook his head. No name, no address, just like the first. "Left in my hotel room," slipped under the door. He paused, his voice dropping. It said, "The man without a shadow fears no light." The audience stirred, a ripple of whispers breaking the silence. David's brow furrowed, his fingers twitching on his mug. "That's cryptic," David said, forcing a half smile. "Sounds like something out of a mystery novel." Jonathan didn't smile back. "I thought so too at first, but then more came." He reached into his jacket again, producing a small bundle of envelopes, 5 in total, each worn, some with torn edges, others dusted with what looked like ash. He spread them out, a fragile deck of cards. "Hotel lobbies, my trailer on set, once inside a script I hadn't touched in months. Always anonymous, always by hand." The camera zoomed in, catching the faint tremble in Jonathan's fingers as he picked up a third envelope, its paper thick and textured. He opened it, revealing a single typed line. He reads, "Do not speak his name. Let him reveal himself." He set it down, pulling another. "This one, if he does not blink, the world must." The audience was silent, every word landing like a weight. David stared at the letters, his face pale under the studio lights. "Jonathan," David said, his voice cautious, "are you saying someone's been... What's stalking you? Since Brennan became pope?" Jonathan nodded, his expression unreadable. "The first came 2 days after the announcement. They haven't stopped." He held up the pale blue envelope again, its folds creased inward. None use his name. Not Michael Brennan. Just hints, fragments, like someone's afraid to say it outright. David swallowed, glancing at the production crew, but no one moved. Why you, he asked. Why send these to an actor? Jonathan's gaze dropped to the broken crucifix, his fingers brushing his silver cross necklace. He thought of the nights he'd knelt in prayer, wrestling with the weight of playing Jesus, feeling unworthy of the role. I've asked myself that, he said softly. I'm no scholar, no priest. But maybe that's why. Maybe they thought I'd see it as a story, something real beneath the symbols. He looked up, his voice firm. Or maybe I was just the only one who'd listen. The audience exhaled a collective breath they hadn't realized they'd held. David tried to pivot, his tone lighter. Okay, let's unpack this. These letters, the dream, they're eerie, sure, but could it be a prank? Someone messing with you? Before Jonathan could answer, a man stepped into the studio's edge just beyond the lights. Victor Hayes, a 50-year-old white man with slick-back black hair, pale skin in a tailored charcoal suit and blue tie, his eyes sharp and calculating. He whispered to a producer, his presence like a cold draft. The producer nodded, slipping a note to David's assistant. Jonathan noticed his jaw tightening. Victor was a media producer known for controlling narratives, and his sudden appearance wasn't coincidence. David glanced at the note handed to him, his expression flickering. Jonathan, let's shift gears, he said too quickly. Your work on The Chosen, it's inspired millions. How's that going? Jonathan didn't bite. We're not done here, he said, his voice calm but unyielding. He picked up another letter reading, When the successor smiles, faith watches in silence. He looked at David, then the audience. This isn't a prank. It's a signal. Victor stepped closer now, visible to the cameras, his smile tight. Mr. Roumie, he called out, his voice smooth but edged. Maybe we should keep this light. The audience came for stories, not theories. The crowd murmured, confused. Victor's tone carried a warning, echoing the text Jonathan had received. Jonathan met Victor's gaze unflinching. The truth isn't always light, he said. He turned back to David, ignoring Victor's attempt to derail. The dream, it's the same every night. I'm alone in St. Peter's Square. Brennan's on the balcony smiling, but the bells don't ring. There's no sound, no birds, no people. Just him and me and the silence. David's voice dropped almost a whisper. That's haunting. Jonathan nodded. I've had dreams of loss, but never like this. I wake up, shaken like I've seen something I wasn't meant to. He paused, his hand resting on the letters. The more letters came, the more I wondered if I was supposed to say something, but I didn't until now. Victor's smile faded, his eyes narrowing. He signaled the producer again, but Jonathan pressed on. There's something else, he said, his voice softer, but heavier. I prayed about this. Every night I ask God, why me? Why this? I'm just an actor carrying a role bigger than I am. But faith, it's not about answers. It's about showing up, even when you're afraid. The audience was riveted, some leaning forward, others clutching their seats. David, caught between Victor's pressure and Jonathan's intensity, tried to bridge the gap. So you think these letters, the dream, they're connected to Brennan? Like a warning, Jonathan didn't answer directly. He picked up the first envelope, the one from Rome, and turned it over. This one came with a second page, he said. I didn't read it until Francis passed. It wasn't just a note. It was a plea. He unfolded a small sheet, its ink still sharp despite the years. He read quietly, almost to himself. He may dress in light but carry the hollow. His gaze will be full but never present. David's eyes widened. That's from Francis. Jonathan nodded. It wasn't doctrine. It was personal, like he knew something was coming. He set the page down, his voice steady. He wrote, if he does not see the suffering, he is not the shepherd. The studio felt colder, the lights dimmer. Victor stepped fully into view, now his face tight with barely concealed anger. Jonathan, he said louder, this is a talk show, not a conspiracy panel. Let's respect the audience's time. Jonathan looked at him, his expression calm but resolute. The audience deserves the truth, he said. And I'm not done. He turned back to David, but his phone buzzed again, another text from the unknown number. Stop now or you'll regret it. His heart raced, but he didn't flinch. Victor's glare burned from the sidelines, a predator circling. David, sensing the tension, tried to wrap up. Jonathan, This is heavy stuff. Maybe we take a break. Come back to it. Jonathan shook his head, his voice firm. No breaks. Not yet. He gathered the letters, his fingers brushing the crucifix. He thought of the cross in his hotel room, the quiet moments of prayer that had kept him grounded. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about something bigger, and he wouldn't stop until it was said. The Boston studio crackled with tension, the air thick after Jonathan Roumie's refusal to back down. Jonathan, a white man with shoulder-length, wavy brown hair, a short beard dressed in a black leather jacket, dark jeans, and a small silver cross necklace, sat resolute, his hands resting near the bundle of mysterious envelopes on the table. The broken crucifix beside them gleamed under the studio lights, its cracked base a silent anchor. David Walsh, the host, a 45-year-old white man with neatly combed brown hair, fair skin in a navy suit and red tie, shifted uncomfortably, caught between Jonathan's intensity and the looming presence of Victor Hayes. Victor, a 50-year-old white man with slick-back black hair, pale skin in a tailored charcoal suit and blue tie, stood at the stage's edge. His eyes narrowed, his attempt to derail the conversation thwarted. The audience was riveted, sensing something bigger unfolding. David tried to regain control, his voice strained. Jonathan, you've dropped some heavy stuff here. Letters, dreams, warnings. Let's take a step back. You're saying these are tied to Michael Brennan, the new pope? Jonathan nodded, his gaze steady. It's not just the letters or the dream. There's more. He paused, his fingers brushing the pale blue envelope, its cryptic line. The man without a shadow fears no light, echoing in his mind. There was a video, he said, his voice low but firm, one that never aired. The audience gasped softly, a murmur rippling through the crowd. David's eyes widened. A video. What kind? Jonathan leaned forward, his expression haunted. It was recorded privately, not for broadcast, not even for the Vatican archives. I saw a fragment, 40 seconds, maybe less, but it was enough. He glanced at the broken crucifix, grounding himself. It was Pope Francis speaking to someone off camera. No robes, no pomp, just a white shirt. He looked tired, old, but his words were clear. David swallowed, gripping his mug. What did he say? Jonathan's voice softened, almost reverent. Don't listen to my voice. Watch the silence. One day it will speak louder than I ever could. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The audience was silent, every eye on Jonathan. He continued. It felt like he was running out of time, like he knew something was coming. Victor stepped closer, his voice cutting through. Jonathan, this is getting out of hand, he said, his tone sharp but polished. You're spinning tales on live TV. The audience deserves facts, not ghost stories. He flashed a smile at the crowd, but it didn't land. The audience shifted, some glaring at him, others whispering. Jonathan ignored him, turning to David. The camera panned just for a moment, and there he was, Brennan standing at the edge of the frame. Not introduced, not acknowledged, just there. His voice grew quieter, chilling. He wasn't looking at Francis or the interviewer. He was staring at the lens, not blinking, like he knew someone would see it later. David's face paled. That's unsettling. Jonathan nodded. It didn't feel like he was listening. It felt like he was watching through the screen at me. He paused, his hand brushing his silver cross necklace. He thought of the nights he'd prayed, feeling the weight of his role as Jesus, questioning if he was worthy. I asked around, pulled every string I had. The video was erased, every copy, every device. Gone. The audience stirred, unease spreading. Victor seized the moment, stepping fully into the light. This is absurd, he said, his voice loud, commanding. Jonathan, you're an actor, not a detective. You're risking your reputation with this fantasy. He turned to the audience, his smile calculated. Let's talk about the chosen. Something real, something inspiring. A few audience members clapped hesitantly, but most stayed silent, their eyes on Jonathan. He didn't flinch. The truth isn't a fantasy, he said, his voice calm but unyielding. And I'm not here to inspire. I'm here to say what I've seen. Victor's smile tightened, his eyes cold. He signaled a producer who hurried off stage, likely to pull strings behind the scenes. David, sensing the show slipping, tried to pivot. Jonathan, let's say this video existed. Why would it be erased? What's the point? Jonathan looked at the letters, his fingers tracing their edges, because it didn't fit the story they wanted to tell. He picked up another envelope reading, "He wears no shadow because the light fears him." He met David's eyes. Francis wasn't giving a speech. He was giving a warning about someone who'd lead with silence, not peace but absence. The audience was frozen, absorbing every word. Outside the studio, the story was already spreading. Audience members had been tweeting, posting clips of Jonathan's revelations. Jonathan Roumie and Michael Brennan trended with comments ranging from awe to skepticism. Victor's phone buzzed in his pocket, likely alerts from his team, but he ignored it, his focus on Jonathan. David leaned in, his voice low. "You're saying Francis knew something about Brennan? That's a big claim." Jonathan nodded. "I don't make it lightly." He thought of the cross in his hotel room, the quiet moments of prayer that had steadied him through doubt. "When I got the role of Jesus, I felt unworthy, like I'd failed the story. I prayed every day to carry it right. This feels the same, like I'm carrying something I didn't ask for, but can't ignore." A woman in the front row, a 40-year-old black woman with braided hair, wearing a red coat, stood and spoke, her voice trembling. "Mr. Roumie, I watched The Chosen. You helped me find faith again. If you say this is real, I believe you." The crowd murmured in support, some clapping. Jonathan's eyes softened, his presence warm, almost healing. "Thank you," he said, his voice genuine. "I'm not asking for belief. I'm asking you to listen to the silence." He thought of the moments he'd listened to fans, their pain, their hope, and felt God's call to be present. That call was here now. Victor's patience snapped. "Enough," he said, striding toward the stage. "This isn't a pulpit, Jonathan. You're spreading rumors, damaging reputations. Think about your career." His tone was a velvet threat, echoing the text Jonathan had received. Jonathan met his gaze, unafraid. "My career isn't the point. The truth is." He turned to David, ignoring Victor. "There's a photo," he said, reaching into his jacket. A still from the video printed before it was erased. He pulled out a folded sheet, heavy matte paper, and laid it flat. The image was grainy, showing Francis in a plain room, but at the edge stood Brennan, his eyes locked on the camera, unblinking. David stared at it, his jaw tight. "He's looking right at us." Jonathan nodded. Not at Francis, not at the room, at the lens, like he knew I'd see it. The audience leaned forward, straining to see, but the cameras caught it, projecting the image on studio screens. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Victor's face darkened. "That's enough," he shouted, stepping onto the stage. "This is reckless, Jonathan. You're playing with fire." He turned to the audience, his voice smooth again. "Don't buy into this. He's an actor weaving a story. Let's move on." But the audience didn't move. They were with Jonathan, their phones out, recording sharing. Victor's attempt to discredit him was backfiring, the truth gaining momentum. Jonathan sat still, the photo between him and David, the letters a quiet testament. He thought of his prayers, the cross he wore, the faith that had carried him through doubt. This was his moment to stand, and he wouldn't waver. David, shaken, tried to close the segment. "Jonathan, we're out of time, but this isn't over, is it?" Jonathan shook his head, his voice firm. "Not yet." His phone buzzed again, another text. "You've gone too far." He didn't look at it, but his resolve hardened. Victor's glare burned from the stage, a man losing control. The studio lights flickered just once, and Jonathan knew the fight was only beginning. The Boston studio pulsed with raw energy, the audience gripped by Jonathan Roumie's revelations. Jonathan, a white man with shoulder-length, wavy brown hair, a short beard, dressed in a black leather jacket, dark jeans, and a small silver cross necklace, sat steady, the grainy photo from the erased video still on the table. It showed Michael Brennan, the new pope, staring unblinking at the camera, a chilling presence beside Pope Francis. The broken crucifix nearby, its cracked base glinting under the studio lights, seemed to anchor the moment. David Walsh, the host, a 45-year-old white man, with neatly combed brown hair, fair skin, in a navy suit and red tie, stared at the image, his composure fraying. Victor Hayes, a 50-year-old white man with slicked-back black hair, pale skin, and a tailored charcoal suit and blue tie, stood on the stage, his face a mask of barely contained fury after failing to derail Jonathan's story. The audience's phones glowed, capturing every word, fueling a viral storm online. David exhaled, his voice shaky. "Jonathan, this photo, it's eerie. You're saying it's proof Francis was warning about Brennan?" Jonathan nodded, his eyes calm but resolute. "It's not just the photo. It's what it means. He touched the stack of envelopes, their cryptic messages. He wears no shadow because the light fears him burning in his memory. Francis saw something in Brennan, something he couldn't name but felt. That's why the video was erased. Victor stepped forward, his voice sharp. "This is reckless, Roumie," he said, addressing the audience. "He's peddling conspiracies, dragging good names through the mud. You're smarter than this." He flashed a practiced smile, but it fell flat. The crowd booed softly, their loyalty shifting to Jonathan. Social media was ablaze. Jonathan Roumie trended with clips of the photo posts, calling him courageous and questioning Brennan's silence on global issues. David ignored Victor, turning to Jonathan. "Why erase a video unless there's something to hide? What else do you have?" Jonathan hesitated, his hand brushing his silver cross necklace. He thought of the nights he'd prayed, feeling unworthy of his role as Jesus, asking God to guide his words. This moment felt the same, a call to speak even at a cost. "There's more in the letter from Francis," he said, unfolding the second page from the Rome envelope. He wrote, "There will be suffering beneath his silence. If he does not see it, he is not the shepherd, only the image of one." The audience gasped, the words landing like a verdict. Victor's face darkened. "That's enough," he snapped, striding to the table. "You're risking lawsuits, your career, everything. Stop this now." His voice carried a threat, echoing the text Jonathan had received. "You've gone too far." Jonathan met his gaze, unflinching. "I'm not afraid of you, Victor," he said, his voice steady. "This isn't about me. It's about the truth." The audience erupted in applause, some standing their support, a shield against Victor's pressure. David, emboldened, pressed on. "Jonathan, you're saying Francis believed Brennan wasn't... What genuine? How do you know this isn't a misunderstanding?" Jonathan's eyes softened, almost sad. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I've felt it here." He tapped his chest, his cross necklace glinting. "When I play Jesus, I carry a story bigger than me. Sometimes I doubt I'm enough. I pray, I listen, I keep going. This feels the same. Francis trusted me with this, and I can't stay silent." A man in the audience, a 30-year-old Latino with short black hair wearing a gray sweater, stood, his voice breaking. "Mr. Roumie, your show saved my family. We watched The Chosen together. If you say this matters, I'm with you." Others nodded, clapping their phones, recording. Jonathan's presence, calm listening, felt like a balm, a reflection of the faith that grounded him. Victor's phone buzzed repeatedly, likely his team panicking as the story spiraled online. He leaned toward a producer, whispering fiercely, then turned to David. "Wrap this up, Walsh. You're letting this get out of control." David hesitated, then shook his head. "The audience wants to hear him," he said, a rare defiance. Victor's jaw tightened and he stormed off stage, dialing his phone, plotting his next move. Jonathan seized the moment. "There's another piece," he said, pulling a small folded note from his jacket, yellowed and creased. "This was left in my dressing room tonight before the show." He unfolded it, reading aloud. "If you show it, there is no going back." The audience gasped, the studio feeling colder. No name, no threat, just certainty. David's eyes widened. "Someone's trying to stop you." Jonathan nodded, his voice firm. "They've been trying since the first letter. But I'm not stopping." He set the note down, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "You're part of this now. You're seeing what they don't want seen." Outside, the online frenzy grew. Posts dissected the photo, with some claiming Brennan's silence on recent crises. Poverty conflict matched Francis's warning. Others called Jonathan a hero, while skeptics, likely fueled by Victor's team, spread rumors Roumie's lost at chasing clout. Victor, in a back room, met with a publicist, a 35-year-old white woman with blonde hair and a black blazer. "Plant more stories," he ordered. "Mental breakdown, obsession, whatever sticks. I want him discredited by morning." Back in the studio, David tried to steer forward. "Jonathan, what's next? You've got this photo. These letters, where does it lead?" Jonathan paused, his hand on the envelopes. "I don't know the end," he said, "but I know the start." Francis believed someone would come wearing the robes, but not the burden. I think he meant Brennan. He looked at the audience, his voice warm but urgent. "Listen to the silence. What isn't being said?" A young woman in the crowd, a 25-year-old Asian with long black hair and a green jacket, stood holding her phone. "I just posted your words," she said, her voice trembling. People are listening, Mr. Roumie. Thousands are sharing it. The crowd cheered their support, a growing wave. Jonathan smiled faintly, his eyes kind. Thank you, he said, his presence steady, almost healing. He thought of the fans he'd met, their stories of pain and hope, and how listening had taught him faith's quiet power. This was his call now, to carry this truth no matter the cost. Victor returned, his face composed but his eyes cold. You're playing a dangerous game, Roumie, he said, low enough for only Jonathan to hear. Keep this up and your next show won't air. He stepped back, signaling the producer to cut to commercial. David, shaken, followed the cue. We'll be right back, he said, his voice unsteady. The lights dimmed the audience, buzzing phones still recording. Jonathan sat still, the photo and letters before him. His phone buzzed again, another text. Last chance. Stop or lose everything. He didn't read it, his resolve unbroken. Off stage, Victor dialed a contact, his voice a hiss. Kill the final broadcast. Crash the stream, blame it on tech. I want him silenced. The publicist nodded, already typing, spreading more lies online. Roumie's unhinged show canceled. But the audience's posts were drowning them out, the truth gaining ground. Jonathan glanced at the broken crucifix, his fingers brushing his cross necklace. He thought of his prayers, the nights he'd asked God why he was chosen for this role, this moment. Faith wasn't about certainty, it was about standing firm even when the path was dark. He looked at David, who was wiping sweat from his brow, and said, We're not done. David nodded, a flicker of courage in his eyes. No, we're not. The commercial break ended, the lights flared and the cameras rolled. Victor watched from the shadows, his plan unfolding, but Jonathan's voice was steady, ready to push forward. The final broadcast loomed, and with it a reckoning Victor couldn't control. The Boston studio thrummed with anticipation, the air electric, as the final live broadcast loomed. Jonathan Roumie, a white man with shoulder-length, wavy brown hair, a short beard, dressed in a black leather jacket, dark jeans, and a small silver cross necklace, sat at the center of the stage, the bundle of cryptic envelopes and the grainy photo from the erased video before him. The broken crucifix on the table, its cracked base gleaming under the studio lights, stood as a silent witness. David Walsh, the host, a 45-year-old white man with neatly combed brown hair, fair skin, in a navy suit and red tie, adjusted his tie, his face tense but resolute. Victor Hayes, a 50-year-old white man with slicked-back black hair, pale skin, and a tailored charcoal suit and blue tie, lurked off stage, his eyes cold as he whispered to a producer orchestrating his plan to crash the broadcast. The audience, buzzing with energy, held phones aloft, their posts. Dershud, Jonathan Roumie. Michael Brennan flooding social media, amplifying the truth against Victor's lies. David leaned toward Jonathan, his voice steady despite the chaos. Jonathan, you've shared letters, a photo, a dream about Michael Brennan. This is your last chance tonight. What's the final piece? Jonathan's hand brushed his silver cross necklace, grounding him. He thought of the nights he'd prayed, feeling unworthy of his role as Jesus, asking God for courage. Now he felt that courage, a quiet fire. There's one more letter, he said, pulling a small yellowish slip from his jacket, folded tightly. Left in my dressing room tonight, right before we went live. He unfolded it, his voice calm but heavy. If you show it, there is no going back. The audience gasped, a ripple of unease spreading. David's eyes widened. Another one. Right here. Jonathan nodded, setting the note beside the others. It's not just a warning, it's a choice. He looked at the crowd, his presence warm, almost healing. Francis gave me a choice to stay silent or speak. I'm choosing to speak. Victor, in the shadows, signaled a technician, a 30-year-old white man in a black polo, who nodded and slipped toward the control room. Victor's plan was in motion: crash the stream, blame technical issues, and bury Jonathan's story in a flood of planted rumors, Roumie's unstable chasing conspiracies. But the audience's support was overwhelming, their posts drowning out Victor's lies, calling Jonathan a truth-teller. Jonathan opened the final page from Francis's Rome letter, its ink sharp despite the years. This is what he left me, he said, his voice reverent. If the voice of faith becomes only an echo, the truth will die in silence. There are those who will wear the robes, but not the burden, speak the words, but not know their weight. You will know them by the spaces between their answers. The audience was silent, every word a weight. Jonathan continued, Francis wrote, "If I die before him, he must be watched not for what he does, but for what he does not do." David swallowed hard. "You're saying Francis saw Brennan as—" What a false leader. Jonathan's eyes met his unflinching. Not false. Empty. A shepherd who doesn't see the suffering. He tapped the photo, Brennan's unblinking stare haunting the screen. This is what he meant. The silence speaks louder than the words. The studio lights flickered a brief stutter. The audience murmured, sensing trouble. Victor's technician was in the control room, fingers hovering over a switch to cut the feed. But a young stagehand, a 20-year-old black woman with braided hair and a gray crew shirt, noticed and alerted a supervisor. "He's tampering with the stream," she shouted, her voice carrying to the stage. David's head snapped up, catching the commotion. "What's going on?" he demanded, standing. The audience turned phones, recording. Jonathan stayed calm, his hand on the crucifix, his faith a steady anchor. He thought of the fans he'd met, their stories of pain, and how listening had taught him to stand firm. This was his moment. The supervisor, a 50-year-old white man in a black blazer, stormed into the control room, catching the technician mid-act. "Step away," he barked, pulling the man back. The feed held steady, the broadcast uninterrupted. The stagehand rushed to David, explaining, "That guy works for Victor Hayes. They're trying to shut us down." The audience roared their anger, turning on Victor. He stepped forward, his face pale but composed. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, his voice smooth. "Technical issues happen. Let's not jump to conclusions." But the crowd wasn't buying it. A woman in the audience, a 40-year-old black woman with braided hair and a red coat, stood holding her phone. "I just posted this," she shouted, showing a live stream of the control room chaos. "Victor's been lying about you, Mr. Roumie. We've got proof." Others joined in, sharing screenshots of Victor's planted stories, now backfiring as Twitter exploded with Harvard Shana, Victor Hayes exposed. David seized the moment, turning to Jonathan. "You've got the floor. Finish it." Jonathan nodded, his voice clear. "Francis didn't just warn me. He trusted me to see what others wouldn't." He held up the final letter, reading, "The truth will die in silence unless someone chooses to speak." He looked at the audience, his eyes warm. "You're that someone now. You're sharing this, seeing this. The truth isn't mine, it's ours." The crowd erupted, clapping, some in tears. The stagehand returned with the supervisor holding a laptop. "We found emails," the supervisor said, projecting them on the studio screen. They showed Victor's orders to his team: bury Roumie, plant breakdown stories, crash the stream. The audience booed their phones, capturing every word. Victor's facade cracked, his voice rising. "This is a setup. You can't prove anything." But the evidence was undeniable, broadcast live to millions. Within hours, Victor's career imploded. His production company fired him, sponsors dropped him, and lawsuits loomed as regulators investigated his media manipulations. His reputation was shredded, a public disgrace that left him exiled from the industry, a punishment as swift as it was, final, satisfying the audience's hunger for justice. The broadcast ended with Jonathan standing, the letters and photo in hand. David shook his hand, his voice earnest. "You've started something, Jonathan. The world's listening now." Jonathan smiled faintly, his hand brushing his cross necklace. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about what we carry forward." He thought of his prayers, the nights he'd asked God why he was chosen. Now he knew this was his purpose, to speak when silence threatened truth. As the audience filed out, still posting, still sharing, Jonathan stepped off stage, pausing by a window. The Boston skyline glowed under the night sky, a quiet beauty. He bowed his head, whispering, "Lord, thank you for the strength." The broken crucifix sat in his mind, a reminder that faith wasn't perfect. It was real, raw, and worth fighting for. Outside, the world buzzed with the story. Posts called for answers about Brennan's silence, while others praised Jonathan's courage. Victor's downfall trended, his lies buried under the truth he tried to suppress. The studio felt different now, less like a stage and more like a chapel where a truth had been spoken and heard. Jonathan walked into the night, the letters in his pocket, his heart steady. Francis's warning lived on, carried by a community that refused to stay silent. It's a legacy of faith that no one could erase.